First thing we're going to talk about is, this is awareness seminar. I'm a practicing veterinarian. Anybody in here that expects they're going to get a bunch of research things, too bad. I'm a practicing veterinarian and have been working in this area of glyphosate toxicity for about 3 years. Probably had a bit of an inkling before that, but in 3 years that and last winter, and I already thanked a fellow in the crowd that ran into a problem, and that really kicked me into gear because I realized that we're seeing a lot of this that I wasn't really recognizing. And so in the next while, what are we going to do? We're going to cover glyphosate as an antibiotic. We're going to cover glyphosate facts, some facts about glyphosate, and because there seems to be a bit of a problem in that when you talk about glyphosate, it's like the golden baby. You either got the group on this side that says, boy, that's a problem, or you got the group on this side that says, boy, you better not say anything against it. And nobody ever seems to be able to get in the middle and look at the scientific part of it. I'm going to be talking about the scientific part. Things that I'm talking about are all researched, they're all definite. There are 2 points at the end of it, and I'm going to tell you those two that are my concept. But the rest of them are research things. And so the first one I want to leave with you is glyphosate a toxin? Well, for sure it's a toxin. You know what? It kills plants. So it's a toxin. We have lots of toxins that we deal with. One of the toxins we deal with in life is salt. You eat too much salt, you're going to die. So glyphosate is a toxin. Now the other concept I want to leave with you, and as we go through this, there are some take-home messages. There are some that we just kind of bounce over, but there are some take-home messages. One of the take-home messages is we still have lead. We use lead in batteries and all the things you can think of that we use lead in. Lead was the reason that the Roman Empire went away, because they had lead in their water pipes and it kind of softened their heads. And that's the truth. Look in the history. That's one of the things. So we still deal with it. Now, I'm going to ask you to look in your handout. Pardon me. Because in your handout, I have a bit of a thing there. I see the two most important points are the antibiotic and the thing on animals, humane care of animals. But if you look underneath there, you're going to see a blurb about GMOs. And this is a point that I want to make crystal clear. And it's a take-home message in that when we are talking about glyphosate, we're not always talking about GMOs. And if you look in the radical side on one side, they will talk about how they hate GMOs. But if you read very far, they're soon going to be talking about Roundup into Roundup Ready crops. And Roundup Ready crops are a GMO. But that doesn't paint everything with the same brush. And there's not enough information in the research to be against every GMO, nor am I necessarily against Roundup Ready crops, but I'll show you where some problems come in there. So I want that crystal clear, and I want you always to, in this group of people, to always be able to assess this thing when you hear, oh, those GMOs, they're terrible for everybody. And there's some people who probably think that way, and I don't want to change your mind here. I'm not here to change anybody's mind. But if you hear people thinking about that, say, take a look at the science and look at the science of each GMO product. Take a look at the cotton fields where they have kept the insects out because of a GMO. Is that good or bad? I don't have a clue. But it looks to me that might not be that bad because it seemed to keep the cotton going. I don't think many people eat the cotton. But that is where I want to really make that clear. So once we got that, now we're on to the fun things, okay? The other one is, anybody has a question, shoot your hand up, okay? I'll answer the questions as we're going. If you don't feel comfortable with that, pass a paper over to Carrie. There we are, to Carrie, and she'll ask the question. I'll always repeat the question so everybody hears it. Questions don't screw up my organization because I'm not organized. And once in a while we're going to have to stop, or we'll have questions at the end too. And once in a while we're going to have to hesitate because Katie's running the camera needs a rest, or she needs a rest. Every once in a while she has to kick it into gear there. So on with this, history of glyphosate. I'm going to show these things on here. I'll try not to get in everybody's road when you're reading it. Sorry about that. But the history of glyphosate, I always expect people can read my slides. 1964, it was registered as a pipe cleaner. This is important because what it did was glyphosate would chelate with the minerals, catch the minerals, clean them out of the boilers and whatnot. That's a potent product and licensed as that. Then you see the history that it was a plant killer. And so as a plant killer, it did very well. And then you'll see the next part there. Actually, in 1992, they started to spray wheat down to harvest it with glyphosate. And at that time, it was always mixed with other products to be Roundup. We're going to talk about that because from now on, I'm talking about Roundup, and only Roundup as the big name. I'm also including all the generics, but you know all the generics, because there is a massive difference between glyphosate and Roundup, and I'll show you that. But anyway, they started spraying crops with Roundup to speed up the harvesting in 1992. In 1996, then there were the Roundup Ready crops, and I'm going to show you how a Roundup Ready crop is made, which is very simple, super simple project. Well, I say it's simple, it looks like it's simple, but it probably takes more than what I'm saying. And then the big one, 2010, take-home message, was patented as an antibiotic. Very important. The action of glyphosate. Now, we kind of battled with, should we have a fee for this seminar, or how should we work it? So we decided that we wouldn't have a fee for the seminar, but part of the thing would be that we'll have an exam at the end. And so the part of the exam is you have to really remember all these names here, because they'll be on there, and I'll tell you the rest of the things that'll be on the exam. The important thing here, that's just kind of incompleteness. But anyway, this here, shipmate pathway, that's where glyphosate, Roundup affects plants. That's where it affects bacteria. That's why with glyphosate or Roundup, but they get clumped together, and you're going to see how this goes. But anyway, with glyphosate, you could drink glyphosate, not going to kill you, because you do not have a shipmate enzyme in your system. Bacteria in your gut sure do, but you don't have one. And so that's why it was always recognized as a product that wouldn't hurt people. Take-home message, that one there, because we're going to talk about him, and you'll see that it's just this enzyme, all this stuff. Rest of it is not very important for what we're going through right now. Roundup Ready product. How is Roundup Ready? So we go with that anachronism again. What happens is the fat accumulates in the cells of the liver. Then you get blood triglycerides. which some of you don't want to see when you get a lab report, and people, but I'm not saying any relationship to this product. And then you get that elevated, you end up with inflammation, you get scar tissue and cirrhosis. Now, this doesn't happen overnight. This is an insidious situation. In animals, I'm going to show you that because of different age groups of animals, it's less insidious. But the liver functions, you have all these listed in your handout. They're on the exam. But the most important ones are at the bottom here. That the liver stores vitamin A. The liver detoxifies drugs and environmental toxins. And if your liver is buggered up, your whole body's in trouble. That's the main thing to take home. And so with animals, as soon as we start to see a liver problem, we have to work hard because they don't tell us much ahead of time when they are into a problem. And so that part of it is very important. I'm going to show you some slides of liver damage. Pardon me. You keep hearing from me how many things are important. Well, I guess I'm kind of, if I didn't think it was important, I probably wouldn't put it up here on the slide for you, or hopefully I wouldn't, because I didn't need to fill the time. There's a lot of stuff I can roar through. But it is a weak problem on the kidneys. And this is well documented. Don't have to get into this. But all of a sudden you throw a heavy metal in there, and it is really a problem. So by heavy metal, you throw in calcium, you throw in iron, throw in manganese, you throw in magnesium, and then you have a problem. I ask you to look at this reference. This reference is from Sri Lanka, and it goes into human thing. I'm not talking about humans, so I'm passing over it, but I'm asking you to look at that reference because of the kidney problems it can have. This one, I am saying, not referenced. If you're handling a lot of Roundup, read this article. Next one, and this kind of goes with Darren had mentioned, this is a different type of adjuvant that's added to the glyphosate, and then you see what kind of toxicity there was, and you'll see that was the same guy that did the research on the other adjuvants and surfactants that were added. And that once you have that adjuvant in there, I think it's a bit of a problem. I think that I see in animals a difference in the source of these products, that there may be a difference that leads to more problems and less. So the top one here, another take home, and that is, you've got it in your handout, it just says, remember the bell curve. You got the bell curve right there. Everything in biology works on the bell curve. If we all stood up in this room, we'd have a bell curve of our heights. And so what we have in animals and in humans is we have people or animals that are really susceptible, and over here we have that are really resistant. And the best example that I can use or give you on that is a human one, but it's well documented, is that when smallpox came into this country, the North American Aboriginals had no resistance, and they were way over here in the death end of things because they were very susceptible. So with the work that I've seen in animals, I see a tremendous difference in their susceptibility to the problems that I see with Roundup. And there are many factors here. And so that's why I'm saying this is an awareness meeting. I see the factors that come in there, the levels and this type of thing. So always think of this, because you know what? 99% of you are thinking this right now, and the other 1% are asleep, and that is that why haven't we heard a whole bunch about this before? And this is why you haven't heard about it. There are some other reasons, I'm not getting into them, they're political. But one of the big things is that it isn't a problem that just jumps out and wipes things out. Many times it's in the background. And as a veterinarian, when I see a problem now that doesn't make sense, that there's something a little screwed up there compared to what I usually expect, I think about, have you got any Roundup in your ration? Just dealt with a chicken situation and didn't make any sense at all, and we found some very high levels. You'll see the levels that we found, and there was no source of Roundup in his feed to start with, but once we got the lab analyzing, there sure was. Okay, next one. Remember that we have the antibiotic patent for this product. Here are what the gut bacteria, the normal gut bacteria. You got billions in your gut. Cattle have millions upon millions because that's how they digest. And that's why we see such interesting things with the ruminant, with Roundup, because those bacteria have to be there to make digestion. You got all this in your handout, and so this other feed things are such an important thing, and I've seen such an important thing in swine and in cattle and in sheep, that there seems to be a difference in the type of energy, how much energy they're on, and their vitamin levels, how much pathology there is that I can relate to Roundup. And so this you have in a handout, don't have to memorize it. Important facts. This is another interesting one. This is a take home, and you can take it as far as you want to take it. And this, I told you it's going to be two things. I told you the one thing where I made a comment. I'll make a comment on this one. This protein in pigs is a protein that will make the gut easier penetrated and leads to what we call leaky gut in pigs. So now, the one that I do not want people quoting me on right now, but there is, if you read in this research, you're going to see it. This also is a protein that's in your blood-brain barrier, pig's blood-brain barrier. I can't talk about humans. Pig's blood-brain barrier that keeps toxins out. And this character here, this protein, will loosen that area. We know that in pigs. End of that, increases the permeability of the intestinal wall, so letting toxins in. In pigs, I'm relating to that. One of your references there is a Dr. Dunham in Iowa that I've done lots of work back and forth with, and he does mainly his work with swine and has done work with this type of thing. Case number 1. You can read the case. I'm going to hit the highlights, okay? Because it's the pictures that I have that are probably the most worthwhile for you. Well-managed herd, really well-managed herd. You're going to see I'm going to comment on his number of naval infections. This herd, I thought he might kill some calves with how much bedding he had in there. So it wasn't due to lack of bedding and cleanliness that these calves were running into naval infections. They ran on a regular range, and then he put them onto Roundup Ready corn in the wintertime. The corn had 2 passes of Roundup, 1 liter per acre, each spraying as he went through it. Interesting comment. Most of you in here use Roundup, and that's okay. Some of you don't, of course. Whatever, you make the decisions. Not that many people realize that the Roundup they bought 2 years ago, it might be 3 years ago, had 360 grams of glyphosate per liter. Now what you're buying has 540 grams per liter. And, you know, I do things same as you do. I put a liter in, I continue to put a liter in if I was using it. Just a kind of an aside on that one. You make your decisions. This case, problems that they seen were stillborn calves, weak-born calves, some skeletal problems, and then they had numerous naval infections that were very difficult to treat. And that is because of the immune system. What we see here is a liver that is very large for a calf. And you'll kind of have to take my word for it, I guess, but if you look at a rib or at the lung, you'll say that was a kind of a fat liver. And that's what we were seeing in those calves. Here's another one down here. You can see how many, a mottled color on that, and again an enlarged liver. Necropsy at the farm, large liver, mottled livers, and the livers are friable. I'll show you in the next slide what I mean by friable. But the liver kind of looks like sawdust, and it'll break up in your hand. Lab findings, the calves were submitted to the lab. And I'm not on the case of the lab. They found no disease. They found lipid-filled or fat-filled liver cells. And this is what the liver looked like when you cut into it or took your finger and kind of busted it up. Now, I sure hope none of you are going to eat liver tonight, but you'll know that liver is relatively firm organ and it won't just bust up in your hand. Here's one that really shows the modeling, but the thing we're showing here is the infection around there with this navel infected calf. And so what was the interesting things here? We did a mycotoxin panel because we thought there may be mycotoxins here. No mycotoxins. Glyphosate in the stalks, cobs, and kerns was 448 parts per billion. The AMPA, that metabolite, they couldn't find any. So how important was that? I didn't know, owner didn't know, but we were kind of up against it because it wasn't following any disease-type syndrome. Took them off the glyphosate, used molasses. Now molasses, I'm not making a sales promotion for that, but we're using molasses because of that thing about it being an antibiotic. Killing off the bacteria in the rumen, kicking the rumen into gear by the use of molasses to get the rumen bacteria going. I don't sell molasses and I don't have shares in a molasses company. But anyway, the problems decreased rapidly. 3 weeks they were gone. You can make your decisions. No other things, no antibiotics added or anything. Now we have to have a question. Good. Yep.
What about people that are desiccating their crops? If the into it, well,
yeah,
either by accident or
yeah,
by design, would that be the same result?
Yeah. Can I hold that thought for a short time because we're going to come to some comments on it. The question was, are desiccated crops a problem for animals' livers? More or less, right? Yeah.
Just going back to what you were saying before, I was just on the last slide there, you had 448 parts per billion.
Yeah.
For glyphosate.
Yeah.
So you multiply that by 125
right.
For the Roundup.
Right on.
And there's that much.
Holy moly, I made it.
Yeah.
Good man. Thank you. Because that is a very difficult concept for people. That is a concept that I have the most arguments with my fellow veterinarians about. Veterinarians don't believe me, but that's okay. They don't have to. But that is a concept that is, because we're getting this lab diagnosis, but you've got to think of what the toxicity level was. Right on. Thank you, sir. Everybody heard that. He talked about that you get a glyphosate level of 448, multiplied by 125. But I'll get to your question and question, okay? Yeah, go ahead.
First of all, I feed Roundup Ready corn for the last 6 years.
Yeah.
And last winter, I had 2 abortions, which I probably wouldn't have noticed, but the dog brought them into the yard. And the one was still intact, it was warm. I backed it still in my freezer. And I asked the vet if I should send it to the lab in
right.
to And he said, well, how many abortions do you usually have? And so I got 40 cows. And I said, well, it's kind of hard to say because sometimes you don't see them, right? But here I really noticed it, and usually I don't have a problem with my cows, with fertility, I mean, but I had those two, and then I had two weaker calves that died after birth. So that kind of raised a little bit of an alarm. I also talked to one of the researchers at the West Beef Development Center, and they do trials on grazing corn as well. They haven't really raised, the alarm bell in regards to Roundup ready corn. So I've just, so how come?
Yeah, and so the question was, for anybody who didn't happen to hear it back there, had 2 abortions, had 2 weak-born calves. Out of 40 cows, they were on Roundup Ready corn. Was this related to that? I wouldn't know. I'd have to look at the livers, but I appreciate the comments for sure. And that is exactly the story. We'll have situations where we see the direct problem, and then we'll see situations where we don't see the direct problem, and that goes back to this thing right here, that curve of biology. And so I totally believe you. I totally think that there was a relationship there, but there could be others. And in support of your veterinarian's comments, if you had 2 abortions and asked me, I wouldn't send them to the lab, because you're going to have to pay $300 and some by the time you get them through the lab, and abortions are very hard to diagnose. all the abortions that I dealt with that were related with glyphosate, the same thing came back. Fat in the liver cells and no diagnosis. But I'm not on the lab's case, but that's what we found. Yeah, thank you. So next herd, very well managed herd. You've probably all read this already. Nutrition, parasite control was excellent on this herd. And so we opened up some calves. The day I was there, he had 4 dead calves, because you don't really call the veterinarian unless you maybe have a bit of a problem. And so this calf here, I don't have to explain to you that. It's a pretty big liver for just a relatively young calf. And this shows the modeled liver. Not the best picture, but maybe you're seeing it better than I am. I can see it pretty good on the monitor. And it's modeled in there. And again, that liver was friable. And in this, you can see how friable that liver was. So that was one part of his problem. The next part of his problem at the same time was that he had some calves that were on a creep ration. He put them onto a creep ration. They were doing fantastic on this creep ration, but they started to get coccidia. And they were passing blood, and he's a very good operator. He's been used to using amprolium to control his coccidia, and he wasn't getting any results. He was treating calves for 6-7 days, and they weren't improving. They were kind of hanging in there. And so these calves were 3-4 weeks age, younger, stained feces, poor calves, hair coats were terrible. You know what they look like if they're passing blood. And he wasn't having any results. Calves are really loving to creep. These are big calves. They were good doing calves. They were really loving to creep. And you'll see he started to use a commercial creep ration. He wasn't using straight oats. He was using a commercial creep ration. So this is what some of the intestines look like. Blood in the intestines almost look like a clostridial, what we'll associate with a clostridial infection. Again, big fat liver, and the liver's mottled. Kidney in this case was totally wiped out. See the liver on this one? I think that is a different calf, but it maybe is the same calf. And again, we've seen the friable liver. Okay? One of the most interesting cases I've been involved with. Okay? The creep ration, this is where his glyphosate levels were. And again, this isn't like CIS or whatever it is on TV. We don't come to this answer in a half hour, guys. Sorry. It takes a while. But anyway, creep ration, that was his glyphosate level, that was his AMPA level, multiplied it out, and he had a total of that. Creep ration was changed. This client, for some strange reason, believed me, and I'm still not sure why he did, because he had a lot of sick calves. But I told him what I suspected it was, and he says, if you really think that's what's going on, I'll change the creep ration, I'll not treat those calves, and we'll see how they do. Now, he had 4 dead calves laying in the corral, so he did that. We gave him supportive treatment. We gave him multiple B vitamins and injectable iron to build their blood up, because these calves were anemic, and you can see why they would be anemic. And you'll see the results there. 3 days, most of the calves were happy. 5 days, he turned them out to pasture. Didn't use any antibiotics, didn't use any treatment, changed the creep ration. I make my decisions, you make yours. Actions of the glyphosate, as we said, on the gut bacteria, it knocks out these guys, the good guys, and the clostridials proliferate. With the minerals, it ends up with a magnesium, manganese deficiency and cobalt deficiency in these calves, always comes back that way from the lab. Immune dysfunction, we're not going to get into that one, and a hormone dysfunction, all of this ties together with what we're seeing. This slide is mainly for completeness. This one isn't even on the exam. Actions, there's lots of research showing that it increases mycotoxin growth, but in all the cases I've dealt with, I've done mycotoxin panels, which is a very good research thing they have at the U of S, and they've always been negative, so that was not part of what we were running into. Pigs, we see the leaky gut syndrome. Skip that next one. And then there are all the studies with these. The bottom one here is a really interesting one. There's water beetle. I bet there's not a person in this room woke up this morning worrying about goddamn water beetles. And if you did, maybe shouldn't be here. But anyway, water beetles are a thing that they use to monitor the environment and to see that there's no factors affecting the environment. Maybe some environmental people here can even add to that for me. There's some more in your reference about these water beetles. And it really knocks the heck out of these. That's just straight Roundup, not just glyphosate. I'm coming to your question. Sources of glyphosate, okay? And as I go through some of these, I'll throw you some anecdotes, because I think we still have about 10 minutes, and I don't know how you're ending up over there. Good. Okay. As we go into this one, pellets from peas, lentils, including screenings, seem to be a real source. We seem to be able to pick up glyphosate there real easy. Duh. How many fields of lentils and peas don't get burnt down with Roundup in the fall? And I don't blame the people that are doing it, but I end up at the other side of this thing. Calf and lamb starter, many of them have the pellets, because when that guy went to a different starter and had no more problem, he had to pay more for that product, because they couldn't use screenings in there. They had to use some product that they knew had not been burnt down. And soybeans, wow, soybeans, interesting one. You're going to see a level in here, and I followed where these soybeans had came from. They went out of a broker in Quebec, and the broker in Quebec went down, checked out where he had bought them. The mill he had bought them from got soybeans from 2 farmers. He knew which farmer he got them from. Sometimes dangerous to be in that chain. And the farmer that they talked to had sprayed his soybeans 4 times during their growing season, because he had a little bit of problems with weeds, and he had Roundup Ready soybeans. Lentil straw, straw out in the pasture. I pulled a sample from a field. I'll show you that. Roundup Ready grazing. Yellow feed is what you're talking about, and I'm going to show you the levels on that. Yellow feed is where you burn the feed down, harvest it, and then break the crop up. And does anybody see any dramatic problems with that? I bet you've done it and you didn't see a lot of dramatic. There would have been some problems. We had some sheep, and those sheep told me the story. We had a field that we did that too. We put the bales out one night for them to eat, and that next morning my grandson came in to me at the barn. He said, Grandpa, you're not going to believe this. Those stupid sheep are not eating that hay. Well, that is something, because if you know sheep, they'll eat almost anything. And so they did eat it when we put molasses out there, but we never knew what we were dealing with at that time. But that was, and it wasn't real yellow feed, but it had been burnt down with the glyphosate, or Roundup I should say. And then water runoff from treated fields. Wow. This is one that I've done a fair bit of work with. There's some research articles. I ask you in the expediency of time to look at those. 1 part per billion to 3 parts per billion in your runoff water is a problem, because the fellow that did the work on the rats showed where we would see the problems in pig barns if they were getting water in that situation. In pig barns, I'm not talking about people, I'm talking about pig barns. A whole bunch of factors that affect, and I'm still coming to yours. A whole bunch of factors that affect with the bell curve. Age of animals, the stress, the dose and the duration. Other elements in the feed changes. High producing animals like dairy cows. Beef cows, way over here. Doesn't seem to affect them. Dairy cows, I got the cases, I'll show you the cases, or I'll comment on the cases. They're way over here, they're really susceptible. Their livers go kaput. That's where we started into this project, because I seen a syndrome called ketosis in dairy cows that shouldn't have had ketosis. And their livers were massively screwed, and I'll show you the levels in there. So all these have a factor in these things, and that's why we don't see it just wiping animals out all over the place. And that's why, take-home message, we have to think of how we work with this product. Not just toss it out the door and whatnot. How are we going to work with this product? Where do we do this? We're going to talk a bit about the use of humates. We're going to talk a bit, and because of the expediency of time, I am going to ask you to think about the products that can be put in to potentiate the usefulness of glyphosate, not the toxicity, because they bind the metals that glyphosate grabs into, and they make it so you can use a whole bunch less glyphosate and get the same results, or Roundup and get the same results. These products are available. They are registered in the US. Canada, they didn't register them. Monsanto is the people that had to call on that. Dosage of glyphosate and duration. You see what I have on the slide? Dosage and the duration of it. I don't have a clue, because I'm going to show you some dosages. We've seen these cows that were on Roundup Ready corn. How long were they on it before they seen any problems? Cows didn't have any problems. Calves started to show some problems. And so this dosage and duration question needs a lot of research. Lab results. I'll go through these. Lentil pellets. These were lentil pellets. That was AAPA. I'm going to go through these relatively rapidly, but it'll give you a picture of reality of the world. We're talking about reality. Talked about those livers and what went on in the herds, and now we're talking about what we've seen from lab results. Not taking a wild guess. Glyphosate, or the equivalent of that. Flax straw, and gentlemen at the front had mentioned, multiplied by 125. Maybe more, it depends on which adjuvant was in there. Flax straw. Very interesting that flax straw would end up at that level. Interesting in that case that the animals loved that flax straw because they had pica for it, or they wanted to eat it because it's a bit salty. Soybean meal, I promised you about soybean meal. This is soybean meal, and there's a bit of an addition. Veterinarians aren't that great at adding. Only time when we're making bills. But anyway, this one here, you can calculate it out. It's about 7,000, 8,000 parts per billion, but that's enough to cause a lot of trouble. Causes trouble in pig barns, causes lowered resistance. You see a lot of influenza in these pig barns. Vaccines don't work. Interesting situation. Yellow feed, I told you I'd get it to you. And so yellow feed ended up with a 510. The glyphosate, that is not an adding error. That is not a lab error. I had that one checked 3 times by the lab because I was very new at the project then. 19,000 level of glyphosate. They had only sprayed a bit of Roundup into that field. That's where the level was. Would that cause trouble today or tomorrow? I don't know. How many days we have to go and what animal group we have to feed. We do know that them calves on the creep, it would be a problem. Water runoff, we can easily find that level. We'll find levels near that. Really important. Last spring, some people in the room got some water results back. I didn't know what to say really. But in the last couple of weeks, I figured out how important that is. Dry cow TMR, this was the first herd I was ever involved in, and that's what the results came back. This guy lost 22 cows before we knew why. Yep.
Can we go back to the previous slide?
You just want to see if I'm technically able. Holy man, it did work. Yeah.
No, I'm trying to figure out where the adding problem was. Which of those numbers is wrong? Because there's a big...
Well, I think if you look at it, if you take 4307, and that's pretty well close to 2 times that. So that's right. The glyphosate number here is wrong.
Okay.
And so this one here, a good question. Thanks, Stuart. And so then this adding here is where the veterinarian screwed up. This guy here. Yeah. And so then the dry cow ration, this was dry cow ration. This was the barn where I went into and seen a whole bunch of cows that had ketosis before calving. This guy lost 22 cows before we ever got the problem solved. It was thanks to Dr. Huber, and you're going to see the guy that worked with Penergetic, Derek Pratt, were the 2 guys that made me aware of what I had to do in this herd. And as soon as we pulled the glyphosate out, and added the molasses, within 2 weeks he had no problems. And I'm going to say this, and there probably are some Dutchmen in the room, but if you know Dutch people, and I'm pretty close to Dutch being from Belgium, that Dutch people are a little tight and or frugal. And this Dutchman asked me to come back. He would pay me, and he was a long ways from here. He would pay me to look at that herd when they turned around. He was so happy. He loved those cows. He had 250 milking cows, but he lost 22 of them over a period of about 2 to 3 months. And all we did, pull the glyphosate out, put the molasses in. No antibiotics. The change was there. Pea straw in a field, this is out of interest. I pulled this just out of a pea field that a guy told me that he knew there was some glyphosate onto it or Roundup onto it. That was the result. Calf starter, I told you about it. This calf starter where it had 10 parts per billion. They're very sick calves. It was a lentil pea screening. The next one had glyphosate at 204, and those calves were happy as could be. Not a sick calf, he carried on. And so this is where dosage and duration. Next one here, where he had them at 920, they were really sick calves. Because these little calves, they seem to be a lot more susceptible than the cows, and had liver problems and chronic bloating. In pet food. This is in case somebody in the room has a pet dog. That's the levels that they have seen. Your reference is a lady starts with an S. She's at the end of your references, has the work on that. Follow up. Kelsey really had some good jokes. So research. Not research to investigate if Roundup causes problems. Now, we don't have to do that. We have to figure out what levels cause the problems and how to handle it. Anybody wants to argue with me about whether it causes problems, I can show them the work. And so I make that statement, and that's got research behind it. But what levels, what duration, how does it seem to cause problems? Look at the one that I told you, that guy with the J name, and I can't pronounce it, from Sri Lanka, that talks about Roundup and the heavy metals. It's in your thing. Look it up on the internet, and you'll have some interesting reading. That's what we have to do. And we have to get people doing the research thing. And we got to determine the levels, the duration, the classes of livestock. I'm a veterinarian. My work has been paid by the clients that I worked for. That's who paid for this work. So thank them. I'm not going to ask the ones in the room that were involved to stand up, but that's who's paid for it. But we're going to have to get some work done in this area and encourage people to do it and not be in this fight about radicals and non-radicals. I mean, get the radical bit out of this and do it scientifically. And other factors were how important. Preventing, big question, humane treatment of the affected animals. These animals are really sick and they're really unhappy. When your liver goes, you're going to be sick and you're going to be unhappy. Main points, take-home points. And I think I'm doing good for the camera and the timing. Antibiotic resistance and usage. Wow, everybody's talking about the overuse of antibiotics. And we're putting a registered antibiotic at 2 pounds per acre. Man, don't have to do a lot of thinking on that. And that is not my thoughts. That is from research. Humane concern for the animals. Okay? 2 questions I'm going to leave you with. How much effect does this have on wildlife, animals, birds, and fish? Put that one in your mind. That's the biggest take-home one there. That is the one, because that's the one that's going to get some action. And we're going to learn how to handle these products. They handle lead. I re-emphasize that. The next one, I guess I'm making 3 comments of my own. The one on effects of wildlife and whatnot, that's from some of the references. The one on the bottom here, I have really wondered about the effects of a chemical on BSE and chronic wasting disease. And the reason that I have that is that when we were in Britain doing the foot and mouth, really good livestock people, and they said, we have never seen BSE before, and that's when BSE was really hitting there. And they said every farmer there, of course, maybe they all talked, but I don't think so, because they couldn't because of the foot and mouth communications. But they all said, we really wonder if it is related to a chemical, because they were seeing a lot of BSE and chronic wasting disease being related to that. Interesting thing, that's my thought. That's not a documented issue. Thank you for listening. Any questions?